My name is Tim Brown. I'm based in the UK and I'm dealing predominantly with the E3 application and the DS products. Today, I want to introduce the DS-E3 set of applications, in particular with the configuration that we've put together known as the starter package, which is a good way of introducing the basic project management of E3 projects into the E3 setup. So, the agenda today, really just to quickly introduce you to the DS products. We'll not go into too much detail on the entire suite, but at least give you a little bit of visibility as to the breadth that the application can cover. We'll then have a look at some of the routine tasks that typically when you're working with E3 in a file-based environment, give people the headaches and the pain points while they're working. And then introduce you to our starter package, which we believe tackles some of that required functionality to take some of that pain away from the day-to-day design work. The areas that we'll look at are to do with the user management, the E3 environments themselves, accessing all of that project history, finding your projects using the search, and a basic approval process that you can use within the E3 for releasing data. Hopefully it's not going to be death by PowerPoint, so we'll run through some of this in slides, but then we'll actually have a look at the application in anger, and hopefully you can see how it works. We'll have a quick summary, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end for questions. So again, if you've any questions, please put them in the chat window, and we'll do our best to answer them within the time and the session. If not, we have got all the contact details, so we'll get back to you with the answers if we don't cover everything. There isn't another webinar following this one, so if we do overrun, I'm happy to take more questions. But if you feel you need to leave, then no problem, feel free to do so. Okay, so let's get started. So as an introduction to DS-E3, I just want to show you the breadth of the functionality which DS actually brings to the E3 product. First off, DS-E3 is an integrated electrical domain data management system that's embedded deeply within the E3 application that's based on Zuken's own DS2 platform, which has been in existence for quite some time. As I say, it's fully integrated into E3 and therefore understands all of the data structures native to the E3 application. And it has a very broad area of application, from starting on the left-hand side, simple document control with things like check-in, check-out, reusing of data, access control and vaulting of the various projects, as well as enabling automatic publication of data and searching. As well as looking after the data, we also start to look after a little bit more about the design process. So we introduced the ability to have approval flows, the idea that people can fulfill different roles, managing the templates. An area which is getting a lot of interest for people at the moment as well is the linking of the electrical domain through to the wider enterprise, whether that's the PLM environment or the ERP systems that most enterprise companies are operating within. As you know, E3 is a database part-centric driven application. So one of the key parts that DS brings is the ability to manage that part information, both from the library perspective and handling the material data of the objects that are used within the E3 design projects, but also taking that data at the end of the project and populating and managing the bills of material. And again, that's a key area which can be used to integrate and pass that information further up into the enterprise through the links to the PLM or the ERP system. The fourth area, which DS sort of has a large strength in, is really in enabling and expanding the basic functionality of the E3 application with regards to design reuse across your projects. So it takes the standard variant configurations within E3 and the sub-circuit concept that's available to you in E3 and extends that by applying a management layer to give you a lot more configuration and control over the variants and options that your projects utilize, and also applying an approval and management layer to the subcircuits to allow you to transition your electrical projects from being a sort of a project-based approach to turning them more into a platform-based approach that can be reused across multiple designs of a similar nature. So as you can see, the footprint of DS is quite large. It covers a lot of functional areas, both within the design area, but also within the wider enterprise. And as such, it can be quite daunting for a company to take on and understand all of that process before they start rolling the DS application out. So within Zuken, we have configured a cut-down version, if you like, of that wider package, which basically focuses on some of that smaller domain-based application and tries to enable some of that simple project management from a designer's perspective by concentrating on 4 sort of functional areas, really. The first is the environment itself. This is managing the various databases that are used within your E3 environment, the settings file, the templates, all of that control that the projects are going to be based off. Project control, so this is being able to know what the various versions are, understanding the various incarnations of the project, and being able to access through the project history all of the previous versions of those projects as well. The other thing is, of course, in any large organization, typically the number of projects grows quite considerably, so being able to find those projects can be a challenge. So DS-E3 with the starter configuration gives you this ability to search for projects, not just off file names, but also off some of those project attributes. So hopefully these are the tasks that some of them will be familiar to you, if not all of them, that you encounter when you're working with E3 within a traditional file-based application. The key areas that most people have a problem with, things like version control. So when you're working just with files, the version control is really at the control of the individual engineers, remembering to do file save as storing the version number. This is error prone and can lead to the same version containing the same data or incorrect data. So again, it takes time and leads to errors within the project. Accessing those projects, again, they're stored on the file system. So the only permissions that you can associate to those projects are based on the file permissions. That's very difficult to control from within the design area itself, and you're subject to assistance from your IT infrastructure to apply those access permissions. And it's got no concept as to a user being able to access that within a different role within the project and who can access it. So these are hopefully all things that resonate with you with regards to problems that you encounter on a daily basis. The next area is, as you know, E3 has a database, but typically it doesn't just have one database. We have multiple databases, whether they have different symbol definitions like ANSI or IEC symbols. We may have different manufacturers' databases. We may have different approval statuses of those databases, depending on the projects that are being worked on. And making sure that the right project uses the right database, again, is down to the individual users to manage that. And coordinating that across the enterprise and all users can be quite error-prone. The same applies to the E3 template, the old E3T file, which everybody's used to seeing in the background, which controls the way E3 will work and how it will represent the information. That, again, is configurable, and making sure everybody's using the same one can be error-prone. And the structure template as well, which controls how that project will be structured within the folders and the devices. Irrespective of the individual release versions, one of the problems with the file-based system is it's very easy for people to make copies. So quite easily they will come along and say, oh, well, I want a copy of that project, and they'll create a copy of it, put it on their local machine. Which is the master copy? Who has got the latest one? All of that, again, it's under the control of the individual users, and even the most fastidious of users will make mistakes and pick up the wrong file at various stages. And then the last area, of course, when you've been using E3 for any particular period of time, number of projects grows quite considerably. Trying to remember which project is which leaves you pretty much at the vagaries of the Windows search, which really only works off file names. So you're dependent on intuitive file names. You can't search for customer names or project numbers within the environment. So locating your data either during the design process or after the process, 6 months later when you need to revisit that, can be quite error-prone and troublesome. So hopefully the starter configuration has been introduced to try and tackle some of that pain and headache. The key thing behind it is it's intended as a start to the full capability of DS, but it is a particular focused set of functionality which is deployed and configured, ready for you to work with. As a result of that, it's got a short ramp-up time in terms of installation and adoption, and equally the training for the users and the administrators, because of that standardized installation, can be quite focused and quick in comparison to the full suite and the deployment of the full DS application. However, DS Starter Package is based on the full DS suite, so it's modular and flexible so that as your requirements and ideas in terms of how you want to work with DS grow, then we can turn on more and more functionality as your requirements keep going. So how do we tackle those basic pain areas that you may have within your organization? Well, we focus on some key parts of functionality that DS enables. The first is really looking at the user management. So rather than just opening up E3, the user now starts to log on to a managed environment which provides them with a vaulted access to the data. That also gives them access rights with particular roles to perform certain operations within the environment. That environment itself is also managed, so any one project is related to an environment, and that environment knows about the database that's used for that project, the templates that are used within that E3 project in terms of how E3 will be set up, and also the structure nodes with regards to how that structure project is structured within the standard E3. Because we've moved from a simple file-based system to a secure vault area, then we can also enable the ability to check in and out projects while you're working on them from that vault. So we then know who has got access, who is working on a particular project at any one time, and also keeping the previous versions of those projects are all handled within the vault, which means that downstream we can also access all of those previous versions that are stored within the vault. So if you need to roll back to a particular version, you can do. Again, because we're managing the projects and it's integral to E3, not only can we search off the file names of the various projects, we can also search off any of the various attributes that a project may contain. And the starter package is configured with some of the standard attributes like customer name, project ID, already built into that search criteria, ready for you to work with and navigate your design process. The final piece of functionality that's pre-configured is the approval process. So rather than just having a simple file where people update the drawing board to say it's approved, we can now implement a formal approval process, and there is a pre-configured approval process within the environment that now allows you to do a formal release of those documents within the system. So I'll have a quick look at each of those pieces of functionality in a little bit more detail as to how E3 tackles each of those bits of functionality. So the first is user management. So to start with, the DS application, which sits inside the E3 tool, will enable a logon to the DS environment. Each employee can be given a logon with his own personal account, which is managed within the DS environment. Or alternatively, if your IT people want to work in this way, we can enable it to work with the Windows credentials so that you can perform a single sign-on type of logon. Because we're now working with the users, we've got a record of who the user is, and that user themselves can then fulfill a series of roles. So with that user, we can allocate them a role, and with that role, they can have certain permissions and certain views of the data within the system. So depending on whether you're a designer or whether you're an administrator, you may see some of the menu commands hidden or not. And again, the starter application comes with some roles pre-configured. The two roles that are there are the standard user as a designer and also the administrative user. If a user is related to more than one role, then when you log in, you can choose which role the user you're going to perform at that time, or we can configure the system to combine those roles together, so you get the superset. And again, the final stage of having this user credential within the DS environment is we can now start allocating permissions against those users or groups to specific projects within the environment. So again, certain projects can be made visible to certain users, read or write only, and also the ability to create other objects from them. Okay. The next area that we look at is the management of the DS settings and the environment itself. So the idea behind the environment is that we will create a standard set of settings for a particular project that we then relate to that project. So every time you open that project, E3 will be set up using those settings to make sure that the project is run and configured in the correct way and has got access to the correct database. This may be driven by international standards or particular suppliers and so on, but it covers the project structure, the template that controls E3, and also the database settings that are used. You can create multiple environments within your administrative area of DS, and then the users, when they create the project, they just select which environment they want to utilize, and DS will then manage changing all of those settings over for that project every time it's opened. Okay. So the two templates that are controlled predominantly are the E3 settings file and also the XML file for the structure template that's used within the project tree to show you the file folders and so on, whether that's function or location or a customer specific structure. That environment also contains the database settings. So in this case, it could be the IEC symbology is used for this particular project, or we may use the ANSI symbols for a particular project. And again, that can be pre-configured into the environment and associated to that project when you create it. And then the final stage of that environment is managing that approval process that the documents will go through when you choose to do a formal release. As I say, by default, the starter package does include a pre-configured sort of standard approval process using sort of 4i checking on the documents. Okay, because DS is storing all of the project data in a secure vault rather than just being put onto the file system somewhere which the users can access, then what that means is that we can actually see all of the data associated to that project as it goes through its design cycle. So every time a user checks in or checks out a project for continuing their design work, it will create a copy of that data within the vault that then gradually builds up. And at any stage, you can see the history of that project using the check-in, check-out tabs and see the versions that are in the vault. And you can roll back to a previous version if you suddenly find you need to go back to a previous version. It doesn't just track the checking in and the checking out versions. We also record the key versions that are used in any part of the release process as well. So as well as seeing the list in this particular image on the screen now at the moment, the first image, we're seeing sort of 12 different check-in versions. We can also see a subset of that data in the approval history tab, which only shows me the versions of the project which were actually used during that approval process. So we can track all of that data and record all of that data over the life of the project. Because we've got access to that data, then DS also enables you to reuse that data at any version within a new project. So it enables you to pick an existing project at any version and actually reuse that within as a starting point for a new project. And it's not just the latest, you can actually pick any of the older versions as the starting point for that project to begin your new design. The key part of that sharing and reusing of the data is that DS understands where it's come from, and you'll see this later on, hopefully. There is a tab within the DS application that shows you where a project has come from, and you can actually see that from the other side as well, in that you can see where a project has been reused, depending on how you focus on that data. Okay, from a search perspective, the last area that we want to introduce with DS-E3 starter package is the searching. So there are some standard objects within the application that you can search for. By default, these are configured as the folders which the projects are put in, and also the projects. Each of these objects can have different attributes associated to them, which are the search criteria. So you can see on the screen here, we may have things like the customer name, the project ID, the approval version, can all be used as search criteria for that particular project. The results of those searches are displayed in a tabular view, and from there we've got easy to use navigation to move you to where that exists within the Vault structure. Or you can download a previous version, and you can further refine your search results by grouping or filtering the tabular view that's presented to you as a result of the initial search. As we've mentioned, there is an approval process pre-configured within the starter package. This is a relatively simple process. There are 3 lifecycle states for an object. The first one being the in work, then moving through to in approval, and then an approved object. The process is initiated by the designer effectively issuing a request to approve the document. That request will move the document from the status of being in work to the in approval state, and at that point it will lock the project and make it read-only within the DS environment. That request for approval will then be moved to a user who has got suitable permissions to perform that checking or approval task, and they can then pick up that document, perform the checks and the reviews that are determined by your own internal process. And if they're happy with that request, they can approve it and move the document again from the in approval state through to the final approved state. And again, the project is read-only during this operation. If as a result of a subsequent change, so an ECN maybe appears, then we now need to create a new version of that particular document. Then the next stage of that lifecycle is that we can move the document from its approved state, create a new version using the version up command, which then takes a copy of that approved document, increments the approval version, and creates an in-work copy ready for the designers to be able to continue implementing that change request. And the lifecycle will continue as many change notes as you put through. There are 2 other actions that are available to you within that standard workflow. The first is the cancel. The cancel request is typically done by the user. So this is where they will cancel the request because they suddenly realize a mistake, and that moves the document back to in work, and they can carry out the change, they can make the change and then put the request back in. Second interaction is the reject operation, and this is typically used where it's moved through to the approved stage, and the person doing that checking and approving is not happy with the design as it is, and wants to send it back to in work to allow for any remedial action to be done. And at that point, they can reject the approval. There is also an option for a self-approve, which basically moves the document straight from in work to an approved, and again, the project is read-only. Key part of the approval process is that it's a standard process which is triggered and built into DS through the and E3 through the context menus. So the process is very apparent to the users while they're designing. And then the actions of that approval process and the status of the document are transparent and available to everybody to see where the document is in that approval process, both in terms of its property and status within DS, but perhaps more importantly, in terms of watermarking and updating of attributes on the drawing borders so that anybody accessing the project can see its actual lifecycle state. Okay, so hopefully that's introduced the areas that we are going to look at. So really now what I'll do is I'll show you E3 and DS working. So I'm going to start DS. In this case, I'm going to just start the E3 application from the desktop as normal. And in my case, DS is configured to work with the Windows single sign-on. So as it launches E3, it's checking my Windows credentials. It's firing up the E3 application, which has got the DS enabled. And you can see we immediately start to see these extra windows which come from the DS environment. And because it's recognized my Windows credentials, it's immediately logged me in this case as my Windows user, and I'm fulfilling the user role. The Commander window gives me visibility of the project structures within the environment, and this can be arranged with project groups together with different folders for the various objects. And inside those folders, we have different projects within the system ready to use. You'll notice here I have the webinar folder with a particular project in there, and that's immediately available for me to start working with. The other windows that I've got on the right-hand side, we have the detail view, the search windows, and the results windows. So we'll have a look at those as we work with DS and some of the projects as we go through. If you don't want to work with DS with a single sign-on, then it is also possible to manually log into the DS environment using our own managed credentials. So if I just log out and log in as a different user, I seem to be struggling to type the password today. When you log in, then it's logged me in this case as an administrator, and I'm fulfilling a different role because this particular user has been given admin credentials. So again, you'll notice the project tree has changed structure. I've got access to my projects and the folder structure as I had before. And if you look in the webinar folder, you'll notice that as an administrator, I see another project in there, which the demo user did not have access permissions to. And perhaps more importantly, I've got visibility of this administration section within the DS environment, which allows me to look at things like the roles, the users and the group configuration, and the environments that DS is going to be working with. The other thing when you look at the projects in the project mode is you can see that you immediately have visibility as to the project status. So the icon that represents the project changes based on the particular state of that project. So you'll notice the standard projects are just checked in. They're available for me to open and edit. Equally, there's a project here which is open, but it's checked out by somebody else that's working on them. And if I just bring across this window so that we can see some of the details, and I click on that project, you'll see that this particular project is checked out to a different user, and that user is busy working on that project. If the project has got a red highlight around it, then you'll see that that's also checked out. And in this case, it's something that I'm working on within the system as the administrator. So these icons change based on the status of the project, whether it's in edit or just checked out, and also its lifecycle state, whether it's in work or in approval. They change. So anybody accessing the DS environment can see the various states of those projects. Okay, so if we just have a quick look at the administration section, just show you quickly, this is the area where we can look at the roles. This is where we can create different roles within the system. We can also use the same administration interface within the embedded toolset of DS to create users and have a look at the users within the system, whether these are single sign-on users. In this case, you can see the demo user, which was a Windows account, or the local users within the DS environment. So everything is integral to the E3 toolset. And perhaps the most important one is where we try to tackle the environments that a project will work with. This is where we can set up those environments. You'll notice here we've got 3 additional environments other than the standard default one. And if I click on the environment itself, you'll notice that some of the properties that we see for this environment is its name, the database that's used within that environment, but we can also specify things like the structure template and the E3 settings file that are used for any project that's associated to that environment. So from an administrative point of view, we can actually start specifying these environments that the users are going to be creating their projects under. One thing you'll notice is that the detail view window is context sensitive. So depending on the object that you click on at the time, you will actually see the properties or the tabs related to that project. So here's the environment tab. But if I was to click on a particular project, then I see in the detail view, I see the various project properties, but also other tabs which relate to that object, which we'll cover as we go through this quick demonstration. Okay, so what I want to do now is show you how we can create a project and how we can work with that project. So within the project structure, we can create project groups and folders in which we can organize our projects. If I want to create a project, I just highlight the folder that I'm interested in working within, and I can use the traditional right click within the E3 environment, and I've got the ability to create new project groups, new folders, new E3S files, or if you've got an E3 project which is managed outside of DS, we can bring that existing design into E3 and start to work with that within the embedded managed environment of DS. In this case, I'm going to quickly create a new project. So the first thing it does is it prompts me to enter the name. So I'll select a new project name, and I can then choose the environment that I'm going to use for this project. So in my case, I'm going to click the showcase environment, which will use a particular settings file, a particular project template, and more importantly, will configure a particular database for use with that project. When I click OK, E3 will do the same as doing a file open on that project. DS has generated that project in the folder as requested, and you'll notice the status icon of that project has changed. So we've now got a red highlight showing it's checked out to me. It's also got the pencil showing, which shows that I've got that project open for editing, and I've got my usual project in the standard project window inside the E3 application. If I want to now continue doing the design work, I've got access to the standard E3 tools of file save and so on, but equally I've also got the additional ability to copy that project into the vault to make sure that that project's available to other people to view. Or in my case, I'm going to, as an administrator, I'm going to save this project as a starting point and close the project down. And what I want to do now is I want to allocate this particular project to a certain designer within my environment for them to do the actual design work. So to do that, it's a little bit sensitive, so I don't want everybody being able to see this project. So I'm going to allocate some access permissions to this. So I want to be able to see this particular project and interact with it fully. You can see there are certain permissions available for different users, and I'm going to allocate this to the designer user. So I will now just grant permissions to that particular user. And anybody else within the DS environment, so the demo user, for instance, won't be able to see this new project that's created within the system. So I've added some permissions to the project. The other thing I want to do is obviously there's some important information that I need for this project. So as well as being able to set project properties inside the E3 project, we can also set attributes within the DS environment. So here I'll just set things like the project ID, and maybe the customer, And when I'm happy with those changes, I just click OK, and that's updated the properties from a DS perspective of how that project is going to work. So from an administrator, I've now got my new project ready to go. You can have permissions set so that the users themselves can create projects. It's up to you. This is just an example use case. What I want to do now is I'll log out as the administrator. And one thing I just need to do is I need to just free up the deliberate mistakes for today. I now need to check in that document to make sure that the designer can pick up that project and start designing it. Prior to that, it's actually in use by me, so nobody else would be able to edit that. So we've now allocated that so it's free, and I'll now log in as the standard designer. And immediately as that designer, they can see the project structure. And there is my new project ready for them to start doing the work on. So I'll now open that for edit. That opens it up within the E3 environment. If I just at this stage do a quick project properties, you'll notice that those project properties that I set within the DS environment have been copied through onto my project within E3. So they're all in sync together with the approval version that this project's at and the check-in version of this particular project and who created it. Okay, so automatically we're getting that data being synced between the projects. And in this particular case, if I just open up one of the drawing sheets, you'll notice that we're actually displaying some of that information on the drawing border. So this is the in-work status, the check-in version. And if we just zoom in down here, you'll see we've got the project ID, the customer is here, and also the approval version within the standard drawing sheets ready for you to start working. If I just quickly add a couple of objects into the project and do my quick design. I've done my design work for this project, if only all projects were that simple and quick. And as a user now and a designer, I may want to save that. I can end the day, I can finish editing, and I can check that document back in and close it up. Or if I just want to commit my work into the vault so that other people can see what I've been working on, I can use the copy in command, which copies my data back into the vault to make sure that everybody sees the latest versions while I'm still continuing the work. When I'm happy with the project at its release point, I can now start the action of the approval. So again, just using the right-click action within the E3, I can now submit my project for an approval. So I'll request this approval. At this stage, it now shows me the approval mode that the process is going to go through and shows me the users who are going to be able to interact with this process. If I'm happy with that, I can click OK. And you'll notice immediately that the status of the document has now changed from being in work to in approved. The DS window has changed, and you can see down in the bottom right-hand corner in red that the properties can no longer be edited inside DS. And you'll notice the project inside E3 has actually had its status changed, and the document is now read-only unlocked for subsequent editing. So as the designer, I'm now going to close that project and return that back to the vault, and hopefully now I'll check that back in so that my users who are going to do the approval process, the actual granting of that approval, can pick up that project and do their checks on their system. So just for speed, what I'll do is I'll log out as the user and log in as the administrator. And as an administrator, I'm going to approve this project. So in this case, what I'll do is I'll open that project up. I'm going to do a bit of checking on the document. You'll notice that it's still locked. It's in the approval state and grayed out. I can do the checks on this object. If I'm happy with it, I can approve it and grant that approval, or I can reject it. In this case, I'm happy with the approval, so I'll just do the approve, click OK, and the document now, you'll notice, has now changed its status to approved. DS has updated to show that approval status, and the drawing border has changed to reflect that. You'll also notice the status icon down in the Commander window has got a little key showing that this is now an approved document within the system and is read-only. So again, now I can close that, close the project, and I can now check that back into the Vault to make sure that the Vault status is all up to date, and that can sit there waiting for any subsequent design changes that may need to come through the system. If an ECN comes in and the user needs to make a change, then the first thing that happens is the user then needs to log on. We'll open up that project, and they now need to be able to start working on the next version of that project. So in this particular case, I will quickly just do a version up. And you'll notice now the project has now gone back to in work and is live within the system and can be edited. And I've now got access to the working system. I look at the history tab within E3, I can see all of those check-in versions of the project, and I can get back to any of those by doing a download or opening of those projects. And I can also see which of those versions is used within that approval flow. You can see here, this was the initial requesting of the approval, this was the actual approval, and this was the version up. Okay, so we're a bit pushed for time, so quickly I'll move on to searching for data. So if I click on the search tab, pre-configured within here, we have the ability to search for different objects. So here I'll search for a particular E3 project, and I can search for, and in this case, I also want to just search for the latest version. When I click on the search, E3 and DS will go away and look for all of the projects that meet that criteria and present the results to me in this result window, together with a tab which shows me all of the customer projects from Acme, together with the latest version. I'm also able to do multiple searches. So if I go back in here and just search for all of the projects to do with that particular customer, then you'll notice I get a second tab with all of those project versions in there. And I can now subsequently group or filter that result set by any of the attributes within the table, just to hone in on the particular projects. If I want to go and find a particular project, then I can do a right click on that project within the results window. I can either download the project or move that project to move to the Commander window, which allows me to then open that project in a read or a write mode, depending on my activity. Okay. The last little bit that I want to show you is if you want to quickly reuse an existing project. So now I'll just create a new folder. So we'll call that prototypes, for instance. So I'm going to create a new folder, which is going to hold my prototypes. And this new project that I've just created, I want to use as a basis for a new project, which is going to be a prototype machine. So if I want to use that project, I can quickly just drag that from that one webinar folder into the prototypes folder. And you'll see I get the ability to reuse the existing data or share it or just move. In this case, I'm going to reuse that project as a starting point for my new design. And I'll click on reuse and give it a new name. I'll not worry too much about the typing at this stage. And at that point, it generates me the new project based on that existing project. And if I click into my detail view on that new project and click on the reuse history, you'll see that I've got traceability of where this project has come from and the version of that particular project that was used within the design that started it off. Equally, if I click on the new project itself down here and I click on the reuse history, I can see where this project was copied to and the version that it then generated. So hopefully that gives you a very quick overview of some of the basic functionality that we've talked about and how that works within the the DS environment, and so on. So the areas that we've tried to tackle, we've sort of summarized here. The first being the environment, the settings files, making sure all of that information is in keeping with the projects, setting up the settings files, the templates, and the database. By putting things in place with the users, we can manage the project access and also keep all of the previous versions of those projects, and then enable a search, not just off the file name, but also the actual properties that go with that project, whether that's customer name or file version. And because we're working within the managed environment of DS, we've got access to the formal approval process, and therefore we've got visibility of all of that project history, both in terms of the different check-in and approval versions, but also where projects are reused across multiple projects within the system. So that allows you to transition from the file-based environment that most people are working with E3 at the moment to a much more managed DS-enabled environment that hopefully gets rid of some of that pain points. So in summary, it's a start to DS. Okay, so the idea is it's a quick and easy to deploy project management based tool for E3, but it's based on the existing DS and the full suite of DS configuration. Because it's got focused functionality, the training is very straightforward and prescribed both for the users and the administrator, and that gives us a very fast ramp up time to adoption within an organization. So the last thing to say is, before we move on to the questions, the normal ZIW does return next year, hopefully live. So the normal sessions will be available, and you can see the dates there. The details of those will be communicated through the normal channels as those dates get nearer. But in the meantime, from the actual DS-E3 for project management presentation, that's the end of the material. So thank you. If there's any questions that people have got, I know we're a little bit over on time, but I'm happy to answer those. But if you need to leave, then feel free. With regards to the questions, there's one question in the tab, which is from Sitheshku. So is it the libraries and components that are managed in DS or local folder? So effectively, your libraries can exist within the normal E3 setup, whether they are inside access files or whether they are managed through a SQL environment. That same capability is available to you. What DS does is make sure that the individual projects will use the correct libraries that are relevant for that particular project. So it will pick up on the exact databases that are configured within E3 and allow you to make sure that they are switched to the appropriate one for the project. A next question from Benedict. Is it possible to add some comments to the designer why a document was rejected? Yes, it is. You can, at each stage of the approval process, you can fill in a comment which is why you're releasing it, or some other information as to what that rejection or that request is concerned with. Yeah, it's just turned off in this particular demonstration. Next question from Ramchris. Do we have sub-project management in DS and also versioning? Obviously, DS as a full application does allow you to manage parts of a project in isolation to the entire project. The starter package is intended to only operate across the entire project. It's that simple project management for the whole project. Another question, does DS-E3 support options and variants? So yes, DS-E3 as an entire application does support the options and variants that E3 natively has. And even within the starter configuration, then you can still use options and variants within your projects. What the starter package doesn't have is the ability to put the management layer on top of those options and variants and the impact those options and variants have in certain configurations and certain combinations with regards to the documents, the way they look, and also the bills of material that are outputted. So yes, we do support, even in the starter configuration, you can use options and variants in the normal way in E3, but you can't necessarily manage those different variants, options, configurations inside DS. You would need the full DS suite to be able to work with that. Next question, to do with file storage and so on of the projects. Yes, you're right. The number of projects can grow quite considerably, but the performance is just down to the integral systems. It's sat on a SQL database in terms of the starter configuration. The vault area is just the file system, and we do have options if you do get too many projects where the full DS application can work with multiple vaults and cached vaults and so on. So there is a scalable solution to the size of the projects within the environment. And really, there isn't, the normal performance of storing those projects. It's quite straightforward. We're working with the data in a local cached copy on the machine, and then that's copied back into the vault at various stages within the environment. So hopefully that answers the question on the size of saving documents within DS. Another question that's just come in from Ashok. Does it support E3 multi-user? Yes, so as well as being able to create individual projects, there is the ability to work with the DMU environment as well in the normal way. Okay, so I think that's all of the questions that have cropped up in my window, hopefully answered. If I haven't answered them fully or there's additional information that people want, feel free to get in contact. The video will be published, as will the slides, so that you can review this and look through it in more detail. But apologies for going slightly over, hopefully you found it useful and a good introduction to both the DS suite and also the starter package. There's a couple of other questions that have just come up in about different versions taking up more space. Yes, you're right, but we can purge old versions out of the system if need be. If you don't need all of those, obviously not of any of the ones which are utilized within the approval process. So the vault can be tidied up and shrunk as well if you need to limit that. Okay, so thank you very much for your time, and hopefully you found it useful, and I will probably speak to some of you again on some of the subsequent presentations.